As an
that
aside,
purchase.
all of you Robinhood hackers out there, if you want to like hack into those big governments and banks and get rid of all of our student loans, that would be cool.
Yeah,
That
how
would
come
be
they
doing.
never hack stuff like that? How come they can never take my
Right.
student loans? I mean, gosh, take something that I don't care about.
Though we could all just stop paying at the same time and the system would collapse.
We could.
It's
do
just
that.
it's just a coordinated non-payment. There are people trying to organize it. Anyway,
Are you one of those people?
I can neither confirm nor deny anything. Before we begin, please visit us on social media at Cold Call Lawcast. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Tell us what you think of our podcast and or ask us a question. Send us hate mail. We like hate mail.
Welcome back to the Cold Call Lawcast. Sitting with me is Sam Dugan. He is a 2L from the University of Minnesota, correct?
Yeah.
And you're actually is it a toxicologist, right? Or were a
Well,
toxicologist
I was a
before you came?
toxicologist, an aquatic toxicologist before law school. More specifically, I was an ecotoxicologist. So I looked at the effects of pollutants on communities of organisms. So not just individual organisms. How does a poison, for example, kill you or a fish? But how community dynamics change. So what are the cascading effects of pollution and how they affect an ecosystem more as a whole? And I went to law school directly from doing that.
Okay, yeah, because what was your process? Because you came here to the University of Minnesota, but kind of stepping back, what was, where all did you apply? What was your thought process? Why did you say, yeah, the U is going to be my home for the next 3 years? How did that go through your mind?
Sure. Well, I guess my path to law school was really slow and indirect. I never thought I was going to be a lawyer. Very slowly over time, studying biology, working in biology field, becoming a toxicologist, I thought that I could do more as a lawyer than as a scientist.
Okay.
And it was kind of a painful decision in that I really struggled with whether or not I was going to stay in academia, whether or not I wanted to become a scientist. My goal since I was little was to really become a biologist. And there came a point where law school was something that was in the back of my head, and then it was more and more prominent. And this really developed as I was a graduate student studying toxicology.
Because you did your undergraduate degree at Boulder?
Yeah, University of Colorado Boulder.
And what was your undergraduate major in?
It was in molecular biology and ecology.
Okay. And then you went on to get your master's degree?
I did. So that was also like a slow route. I was on the 7-year plan in college.
That's a long plan.
Took some time off in the middle of it. Got involved in. I started working up in Alaska as a commercial fisherman. I did that for 3 years. So essentially, I was on the water for about 12 months over the course of 3 years, and that made me extremely interested in natural resource related issues.
What made you, stepping back a bit, what made you want to become a commercial fisherman and travel up there to Alaska? Were you just like, hey, the women are great up there, I want to go and become a commercial fisherman?
So my dad was a commercial fisherman
Okay.
as a career. So were two of my uncles. I spent my first 2 years in Dutch Harbor, which is in Aleutian Island. It's where The Deadliest Catch was filmed out of. My father used to fish on some of those boats. He wasn't on the show. But fishing was always in the back of my head, and there were always incredible stories that I would hear growing up about fishing. It was something that I always wanted to do, but never thought that I would. Then in college, my friends were going on a backpacking trip up into Alaska. I tagged along on that trip. I decided that I wanted to stay for the summer rather than go back to school, and I was going to take summer classes. And so I was going to work as a fry cook in a bar that my cousin actually owned. And a couple days into that, after my friends had already taken off to go back down to Colorado, we were walking in a grocery store, and I met this woman who knew my cousin. We had a nice conversation. She called my cousin later that day and asked if I wanted to meet a skipper who was looking for someone who's trying to fill a spot on his boat. He had a last-minute opening, and the season was right there, and he needed to get out of town, and he was looking for someone to fill a spot. And I went down to the dock, and I met him, and I took off, and we left the next day.
Wow.
And so it was kind of a real serendipity sort of experience, where I just jumped on a random boat.
Was it just like the clothes off your back, or what did they allow you to do?
Yeah, so I had one day. There was a store that supplied fishermen. I went in there and bought as much stuff as I could afford, lots of sweatpants and socks and rain gear, and jumped on the boat and was off. And
Nice.
that was the start. And so I guess this fits into the larger picture because I became extremely involved in natural resource related issues because of this experience, because of commercial fishing. I just saw how important the environment was, not only from an economic perspective,
Right.
but also from a cultural perspective, and what surplus really looks like. And so what an area that is being utilized, but being conserved in sort of the very definitional term, conserved, like the wise use of resources, where people were catching salmon and at a sustainable rate in a sustainable fishery, and people were doing it right to the best extent that, we as, a capitalistic society can do.
Right.
And I got really excited about that.
And so when you went to grad school, was that always on the back of your mind too, to get into, environment? And because you got your master's degree in
toxicology.
And so how did that come out of the work that you did on the fishing boat as well, and your other work as well?
So after fishing, I got a job working for the state of Colorado doing backcountry sampling in mostly aquatic habitats, doing mostly population surveys, invasive species removals, collecting genetic samples for various scientists. It was an incredible job. I would have kept it, except I maxed out at about $14 an hour, and there was no upward mobility.
Okay.
So I went to grad school to try to attain that upward mobility, and I was looking for a way to bridge my background in molecular biology. I had a strong chemistry background also, with natural resources, and I figured that toxicology was a perfect route. So if I could learn how natural resources and the environment was affected by compounds, that this was just kind of the intersection that I was looking for, and I was still very interested in aquatic issues. And I ran with it. I really enjoyed toxicology. And after my master's, I was hired on by Colorado State University to be a researcher. And we studied for several years the effects of one particular oil spill where a tanker overturned in a revered trout fishery, and it essentially nuked the fishery. So this was a place that people would go and spend their day. They could catch 30 or 40 fish in a day, which is a really special thing to do in sort of a canyon in Colorado.
Right.
And a tanker truck overturned in the creek and spilled approximately 25,000 liters of gasoline and diesel into the creek and nuked it. Our goal was to kind of assess the long-term effects. We knew the short-term effects were disastrous, but the question was, what were the long-term effects?
It was at some of those points where you're like, wow, I really want to get into law so that I can kind of, have more power or authority to be able to either change laws or work within the current judicial system to make sure that that justice is being done for our natural resources as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So through that project and a little bit of thought before, I realized that the law was where the rubber meets the road. So I could figure out all sorts of different processes as being a scientist, and I could disseminate my research to students and to other researchers, and really all I'm doing is preaching to the choir.
Right.
And I could stand on a mountaintop and say, these are X, Y, Z effects. We can fix them. by taking these steps. But I have no power other than the power to persuade, and particularly in a climate right now where science is almost a political issue.
And we'll get to that later, but yeah, you definitely nailed that.
You don't have much ability to persuade the people that you need to persuade in order to enact meaningful change as a scientist right now. And I was deciding whether or not to do a PhD or to go to law school. And I was very close to doing, one or the other. I had no idea what I was going to do. I had gotten into the U and I had gotten into a PhD program, and Trump was elected.
Masochist.
And so that led you to, now did you apply to other universities to go to law school?
Yeah, I applied to several schools. University of Colorado was one that was an obvious choice. It would have been a good choice money-wise, but I was interested in, expanding and seeing things outside of Colorado. I had gone to University of Colorado for undergrad and then Colorado State for grad school, but I was interested in seeing other things. I was looking at Utah because they had a great environmental program. I was looking at a few other schools. My grandmother made me apply to Yale. I didn't get in.
Oh, man. You and me both.
Yeah. So law school has, in a sense, been a nightmare. And then in another sense, it's been incredibly empowering. I'm really excited about the knowledge that I'm learning, and how it's almost like I'm arming myself with the ability to actually enact change, and that's extremely exciting. But to gain that knowledge is extremely painful, and law school is a very painful process. I'm also a little bit older than most law students.
You and me both.
Yeah.
You and me both.
And I think I would have had a really hard time going straight through. I don't think I have the personality type that's typical of a law student, and it would have been really difficult for me to be in the ultra-competitive Type A environment when I was in my early 20s.
And
but
that's
now,
why you didn't get into Yale, right? Because you didn't want that competitive
That's what they
environment.
told me.
Yeah,
they said that if I was a little more ambitious, I was right on the fence. But and now watching all of the people in their early 20s, I love it. Like, I don't necessarily participate in the Type A competitiveness, but I just love watching it. And I have a smile on my face in class
like in
all
a soap
the time.
opera kind of way.
It's really exciting for me to watch it and know that I don't need to be involved, but I get to observe their behavior. It's fascinating. Law students are a fascinating breed.
Yeah, especially the young ones, because I've had that too, where I've seen like young law students.
Abby.
We're just
hello.
when I've been at St. Thomas and we've been given a problem, and like their first instinct is like, oh, we're going to go to the media with this. That's the first, or the board of directors. We would definitely go to them after we solve this issue. And I'm like, guys, you're not going to see them for a long time. Don't worry about it. So, what environmental issues do you feel are the most pressing right now? Is it, kind of this expansion of oil refining that we've seen? Is it global warming? I mean, what kind of issues really concern you going in as a, both a scientist and as a future lawyer?
Why don't we cap it at 2? Because I know
just 2?
That otherwise you could probably go.
Yeah, so
top
like
2.
Hannah, I have 137 top issues. And there are a lot that are extremely important. The expansion of oil and gas is extremely important.
What do you mean by expansion?
Oh, like fracking and wide disperse oil and gas development. I mean, oil and gas was never an activity that was located in a single area, but fracking now is so dispersed and so pervasive in many, many areas that it's very difficult to monitor what's going on. Climate change is a huge deal, such a big deal that I think I'll just skip it, pretend it's not there for the moment. The number one issue is probably education, people not understanding the environmental issues, people not understanding the science, and also the politicalization of science. Also, politicians interest groups saying that because one scientist or a small group of scientists believe one thing, that they deserve an equal